Hey, it's Ryan from Red Panda Recording. This is Studio Hang. Today, my guest is Matthew Silberman, who performs and records as a solo artist under the name Narducci. Matthew's joining us from his studio in Burbank, California. How's it going today, Matthew?
Going great, Ryan. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. First of all, Journey to Los Angeles just came out on Ropeadope. Really great. Was doing some grocery shopping this morning and was checking it out and really enjoyed it. Putting out a record under the best of circumstances is very challenging. A labor of love. What sort of challenges have you had putting out this record in the middle of the pandemic?
It's been interesting. At first, actually, Ropeadope, the label in charge of this, they they asked me if I should even go ahead with it, if we should postpone it. They have a lot of artists whose kind of scheduling would start to change, and they wanted to make sure that I was okay with, I guess, the different difficulties that might come up. And so one thing was just, in this case, the music was already done, so it wasn't anything too difficult with getting it, mastering, I sent it to my mastering engineer, John Greenham. That was the same as usual. The harder things were really, especially with this release, we made 3 different music videos, which was always the plan, and something I do with all my releases, make at least 1 music video. And that was really challenging because you're worried about social distancing in the video shoot. In one case, one of the artists that sings on the track, Let It Go, Shay St. Victor, she just wasn't comfortable with, recording a music video in general, which I totally understood and respected. And, that became definitely challenging. We worked with kind of skeleton crews and, the director in each case was the cameraman and director of photography and kind of all in one. And we made it work. But that was very challenging. And then I think just in terms of the release in general, publicizing it, strategizing how to, get it to people's ears and make people aware of it was a bit challenging because I think there's so many, quote unquote, bigger, more important things going on right now between the pandemic, between, the protesting, between just the elections coming up. There's so much going on in the country at large, in the world at large, that, there was a bit of time where I was thinking, is this a bit narcissistic to be releasing music and trying to call attention to this new product, this new album when, the world's sort of on fire? But I also thought maybe this is the best time to release it because, especially with the pandemic, more and more people are, working from home, not going out, not doing as many social things as they could or would normally for good reason. And so maybe this is the best time to release music because people have more time to just sit at home, reflect, listen to something, digest it. And ultimately I felt like, I worked so hard on the EP itself and getting the music to where it is that I thought, I really wanted to share with people. Who knows how long this pandemic's going to last? So I just thought it would be better to just get it out to people. And, with everything that's going on, I thought some of the songs actually resonated even more than they might have had it not been during a pandemic, especially the song Burn Alive, which is sort of a bit of a post-apocalyptic kind of like Nine Inch Nails vibe going on. And I felt like, well, it feels almost like the world's burning alive, or are we going to burn alive? So I felt like now's as good a time as ever, especially, I don't know about the East Coast, but right now it's like 110 degrees out here. So it feels like we're burning alive anyway.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you bring that up because I know a lot of us in this time we've had to reevaluate. What's the value of the music that we make, or just music in general, in this sphere of everything going on, and feeling small and maybe insignificant, and then also feeling like, oh no, this is what helps kind of bring us together. And I want to talk about some of the different themes on the record. And I don't know how literal you get with in terms of the title and then also the theme of the songs themselves. But so we start with the larger context of Journey to Los Angeles, which I assume has a personal meaning for you. And then just some of the other, with I Am Free, and then themes like We Are Family, and you're already talking about Burn Alive. But did you have a sort of concept for all of these themes, or did they just sort of come up organically in the songwriting process?
Honestly, it was probably a mixture of both. When I started conceiving the EP, all these songs were, sort of in various stages of completion already, and there was a certain through line that I felt that they all had in a connection. And a big part of it, Journey to Los Angeles to me it's half an autobiography in a certain sense, musically speaking, of myself, and the other half is sort of a commentary on music that, for lack of a better description, maybe could be thought of as LA music or LA styled music, which I think, can get a bad rap in some ways. Some people think of just like really pop, super bubblegum pop, or like, Sunset Strip, like butt rock, like Guns N' Roses, which I love anyway. But so to go back to the autobiographical side, for me, it was kind of, you know, there's different aspects of LA that I think people that aren't from here don't necessarily understand or have a certain connection to. Like, I think a lot of times to outsiders, it'll seem like, you see the classic shots of the beach and people sunbathing and surfing, and you see the Hollywood sign and you see Sunset Boulevard. And, I think a lot of the soul and a lot of the heart of the city doesn't always get represented in, movies or media or whatnot. And so I thought, a lot of that I wanted to represent. And to me, the sound of LA is also the sound of both traditional jazz and kind of more modern, everything from smooth jazz, which I'm not a fan of, to, what I'd call like R&B jazz, like artists like Roy Ayers, or like newer artists like Kamasi Washington, Thundercat, Terrace Martin, who, those three I grew up with and used to play with a lot in high school. And so I think there's certain sounds that come from here. It's also the rock and roll, from everyone from Guns N' Roses to System of a Down. There's all these sounds that originate from the city that I think I connected with a lot as a producer, having been sort of a former jazz musician or still a jazz musician at heart. But moving into the production world, I felt kind of more and more connected with those sounds and just sounds of childhood and like the 808s and guitar riffs of the 80s and things that I grew up with. And so the first track, Take a Left Turn at the Moon, that's a little bit of a reference to my mom calling me her space child when I was a kid, because I was always kind of in my own world and, sort of a dreamer, love to sit alone for hours and build things with Legos and whatnot. And so that's actually her singing on the track, that short intro. So the opera you hear, which she's an opera teacher, opera singer. So I kind of grew up with that sound. So that's almost like, my birth, so to speak, in the context of the EP. And then Burn Alive is kind of like the rebirth. There's that concept in Buddhism and whatnot, of, reincarnation. And I don't adhere to any one religion. I think we can gain really beautiful lessons from any religion or all religions. And so, from Buddhism, I kind of got that concept. And I think it ties in also with, there's a certain vibe of downtown LA at night, especially when I was a kid. Now it's, been built up a lot, gentrified a lot. But growing up in the 80s and 90s, it was very desolate, and it had a certain vibe of like Mad Max or Escape from LA or Terminator 2, like a lot of these kind of post-apocalyptic movies. And so I wanted that track to reflect that. And then, before I even had Rama Duke sing on it or write the lyrics and melody, it was already a track I was calling Biker Gang, because it had this sort of nefarious, like, gang of, villainous biker vibe to it. And then the lyrics and the songs she wrote to it totally just took it to another level to me. And it became kind of like an anthem for, you know, what would have been the Matrix Part 7 or Terminator Part 9, or, the equivalent. And then the next song, I Am Free, that one is fairly literal in a lot of different ways. I felt liberated by this project in general, because I think going to music school, being inundated in sort of like the conservatory culture of like virtuosity and, impressing your friends, trying to be the baddest cat, the most killing musician, and knowing all the licks, and there's a certain kind of culture that comes with that I think can be good in a certain way to make people, work hard and grow on their instrument and really become virtuosic, which I think is a good thing to have in your arsenal. But I think ultimately it's not the most important thing when one is concerned with just making music that is honest and true and connects with people. And that became my focus once I got out of music school. So that song was sort of a reflection of just wanting to express, I guess, that I finally feel like I'm free to just make music and not worry about, if anyone thinks I'm killing, if anyone thinks I'm really good, or anything like that. It's really just about being honest, being true, and whatever comes out at the end of the day is if you think it's good, it's good. And I like Duke Ellington's quote that there's only two kinds of music, the good kind and the other kind.
Right.
And so, that song, I immediately, when I wrote some of the songs, I don't write the lyrics. In the case of Burn Alive, I didn't write any of that. That's all Ramaduke, who's an amazing artist. In the case of I Am Free, I actually did write that. It just kind of came to me, and it felt like, the perfect sort of encapsulation of the vibe of the track already. And then I'd worked with Aki Bermise on another song called Change Your Mind from the Allergic to Flowers soundtrack, and his voice just struck me as a perfect fit for that song. So it happened that he was going to be in LA on tour, I think with Lake Street Dive, at some point in the next couple months after I got in touch with him. So we worked out a session time, and luckily he was able to sing on it, and I think he sounds amazing as always. But so yeah, that song was fairly literal. In the case of the next track, The Sun, so I wrote some of the lyrics to that, which is the main sort of chorus, I am the sun, I am your son. And it was sort of a play on words, like, to be someone's son. In that case, I meant sort of like a son of the city of LA. I already knew this was going to be titled Journey to Los Angeles, and I already was envisioning it as such. And then I am the sun is kind of, just trying to, in some way, pay homage to the sun that is such a big part of LA. It's, very sunny, very bright, and I think that something we all associate with it. But also, just sort of a reference to, I think music can enlighten people. Music can be such a powerful way for people to open up their consciousness. And while I'm not trying to make any kind of messianic claims or anything like that, or trying to offend anyone, just thinking of like the beauty of the sun representing enlightenment and things like that. And so it started that way. And then Jeff Taylor, who's the singer on that song, the rest of the lyrics and the rest of the melodies, he improvised in 2 takes. I was at a studio in New Jersey, in Jersey City, when I was in New York for a couple gigs with the Prigs, and we set up a session, and I just said, we'd already gotten the part that I wrote recorded, and I was happy with that. But one thing I like to do in general when I'm producing songs, whether it's, something of my own, whether it's for another artist, is I love to have them improvise, even if it's just 1 take. And even if they're not necessarily quote unquote an improviser, but I find that often you get these gems, these kind of fresh, beautiful raw moments that can all of a sudden add so much to a song. And
Mhm.
so with Jeff, he already is a very, very strong improviser. You know, you see him with Avishai Cohen, Mark Juliana, all these different groups, and he's a force of nature. So I was very confident, you know, we'd come up with some amazing musical moments, but he still blew me away beyond my expectations. And I, you know, kind of just edited it and finessed it. But so much of what the song is now is just him improvising and being in the moment. And, you know, all the stuff about family and that he came up with that, I think, based on what I'd written about, you know, being the son and all that. So, you know, it's just, as Rasan Roland Kirk would say, bright moments, you know, just blessed to be there, making sure the mic didn't peak and, you know,
Yeah.
capturing his brilliance. And then the last song on the EP, Let It Go, featuring Shay St. Victor, that song, there was definitely an element, or I'll back up just really quickly. The Sun also, speaking of the musical sort of legacy of LA, that one to me sort of represented like the Guns N' Roses Sunset Strip kind of sound in a certain way, even if it's not that obvious. You know, there's a certain kind of like just, I'll call it butt rock sound, you know,
Yeah.
of those bands like Motley Crue, Guns N' Roses that, you know, I grew up with. And so just the shredding guitar solos by Orbel Babayan, you know, the main synth riff and everything kind of reminded me of that. I Am Free kind of reminded me of the Roy Ayers kind of like, you know, Cadillac jazz, if you will, kind of sound. And then Let It Go also reminded me of Roy Ayers, but specifically his song, The Sunshine, or, you know, Everybody Loves the Sunshine. And that song initially was actually going to be a song for Shay St. Victor, for herself as an artist, but we felt like we'd done a few songs and ended up releasing one of the other songs we made together called Sonic Illusion, which is out on Spotify and all the places. But Let It Go, it just felt a little more like, you know, it didn't feel like a song for a singer as much as an instrumentalist or producer. You know, the way the lyrics are kind of condensed and conversational with different guitar, saxophone riffs, it felt like a track that would be better suited for myself anyway. And it just, that to me was kind of like representing the end of the journey to Los Angeles. So, you know, I grew up in Santa Monica mostly, a little bit Venice, and mostly kind of always lived near the beach or right on the beach. So it was kind of like, you know, I started in outer space with Take a Left Turn at the Moon. We were burned alive, reincarnated from burned alive, then, you know, become ourselves and I Am Free, learn the importance of family and the sun. And then at the end of the day, we end up back home on the beach, kind of learning to let it go, learning to just be yourself, be okay with being yourself, and just, you know, being okay in general. I think there's so much anxiety, it feels like, in the world right now with everything that's going on, and for good reason. But I think, you know, that song, I feel like for a lot of people, it seemed like an escape, or kind of like a nice way to just get away from that, which, you know, I think can be a great thing with music. You know, you give people a vacation, so to speak, for 3 or 4 minutes at a time, you know.
Yeah, and I encourage, you know, when listeners check it out, to really listen to it as a full statement. You know, we're so used to with like playlist culture and releasing, you know, as singles instead of an album. But I really feel like, yeah, it is a cohesive. It was about what, 15, 20 minutes, the entire
Yeah, I
album, I
think
think.
so. Not too,
Um,
like one episode of a show, you know.
yeah, yeah, exactly. But yeah, it really, and I guess I wanted to, you covered it a little bit, but in choosing your collaborators, and then also how you found a way to put consistency between the tracks, but also you're getting collaborators that have pretty diverse backgrounds and styles,
Mm-hmm.
and giving them freedom, as you were saying, like encouraging them to kind of do their thing. So
Right.
how did you strike that balance of, I want this stuff to all sound like it's on the same record, but I want to give everybody a long enough leash to do their thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think in part of it, I had a very just kind of clear overall vision of the vibe and the energy that I wanted the EP to have. So I think, you know, as a producer, in each session, working on each song with each artist, I think I was keeping in mind the overall sound, which I wanted it to be very striking, very um, not in necessarily an aggressive way, but kind of confrontational in a certain way, sonically. Like I wanted it to really jump out of the speakers. I think before I really started um, like in full production mode on it, I'd watched on HBO this documentary called geez, I'm forgetting the name. It's about Dr. Dre and
Oh yeah,
Tommy Mottola, I believe, the Defiant Ones.
yeah.
And so I'd watched that, and I remember them talking about, the first time. I think it was Tommy Mottola, or is it? No. It's Jimmy
Jimmy
Iovine.
Iovine. Yeah.
Jimmy Iovine. So many big names in this industry. So I think Jimmy Iovine was talking about the first time he went to Dre's studio or something like that, and heard some of what I think became the Chronic, and just how it had this quality of like jumping out of the speakers. Like he'd never heard anything like that. And I think I wanted to have my own version of that. And so I tended to try to record things, with the vocals at least, like a little bit hot, give it just a little bit of grit and edge. Um, but at the same time, depending on who was recording where, like with Jeff Taylor, we recorded in his studio in New Jersey. And, with Rama and Aki, I was able to use my main recording mic, which is a U87, our main vocal mic, which is an old U87. But with Jeff, we used an SM7B. So I think I ended up just adding more aggression with Devil Lock, that Sound Toys plugin, which I love and highly recommend to people. And Shea St. Victor, we'd recorded those vocals a little bit before I got the U87. So that was a Rode K2. So, had to EQ it a little bit more to get it where I wanted. But in any case, I think just because it was all me doing the recording, the editing, the engineering, mixing, I think it's easier in that case to get a more cohesive sound for an album or an EP, because it's all being filtered through my own mind. It's all being, kind of, whether it's mic and mic pre and compressor selection, or whether it's, lyrical content, or whether it's, what synth sounds or other instruments. I think because it's all coming from me, there's a certain cohesion that makes it easier to adhere or to achieve. And I think just, when I set out to make the EP, I already had the tracks in order from, their demo version. And I think with a lot of artists, what ends up happening is, you have a lot of sketches, a lot of demos, a lot of half finished songs. And at a certain point, you kind of look through that and see like, oh, wow, there's something here with these. And so Journey to Los Angeles, those tracks really stuck out to me as had a certain cohesion and a certain just related energy that made me think of the title, made me think of what I wanted to express with that kind of trip and that kind of journey. And so then it became a lot easier, I think, to finish them, to get the singers on board, to get the production together. And I think beyond that, I don't know. I mean, I'll give a good amount of credit to just trying to, in certain ways, keep a certain cohesion also to the mixing process. I wanted to experiment and definitely give each song its own treatment to whatever it seemed like it needed sonically. But I think when in doubt, I would try to use certain similar techniques, whether it was like, an SSL G comp on every track on the master bus, or, Manly massive passive. Wish I had the hardware versions of both of those. but the UAD plugins I think are really, really excellent. So some of it, I think just using similar, not necessarily each track having the same treatment or plugins or processing, but giving the master buses kind of similar treatment, I think helps glue them, each song together sonically, and then having it all mastered by John Greenham, he gives it just so much more fullness and richness. And his main mastering compressor is the Elysia Alpha, which I kind of fell in love with since working with him, and ended up getting the plug-in version just because I wanted to have something close to that. I think that definitely helped a lot. But yeah, I'd say at the end of the day, it was just being a product of my own mind, I think helps the most. Just knowing what you want and figuring out how to make it happen somehow.
Yeah. And when you're going through that process, so you're composing the songs, producing the songs, producing the vocal sessions. You're really covering all those bases. Are you mixing as you go and trying to sculpt it, or did you get them all to sort of okay, I'm done, with the production phase. Now I'm going to try to mix these all, in the same session. Like, how'd you approach that?
I tend to mix as I go to a certain point. I don't worry about, making a finished mix while I'm producing, but I find that the sound of each instrument or vocal or, everything ends up influencing what I'm going to do next, and how I'm hearing the song, so much that I find, I tend to not worry too much about balancing frequencies, like really, say notching the bass where I, boosted the kick, kind of things that balance out the frequency spectrum as much. That I'll generally leave to later. But if it's in terms of giving things a certain sound, I tend to do that more as I'm producing. So, vocals, I tend to like, my typical vocal chain these days, I mentioned the U87. I'll usually run that into, have a dual BAE 1073 mic pre into a Summit TLA 100 compressor or leveling amp. That tends to be the vocal chain. And then, definitely if it doesn't sound like what the song wants or what I'm wanting in a vocal, I'll change things up, and I have different mics and different pre's for that. But and then I'll tend to still want to process the vocals further, whether it's adding additional compression with like an 1176 and LA2A, or, more maybe tube saturation with like Sound Toys Radiator, reverb. Like usually I'm just thinking sonically how to get the vocals or different synths or guitars, saxophone, just how I try to get them in the ballpark of what I want them to sound like in the finished product. So I know, I think, what the song may or may not still need, or maybe, I realize, oh, there's too much guitar, or there's too much saxophone, and scale it back a bit. But I find that mixing as I go helps the production process a lot for me. And that's something I remember seeing Mike Dean, great hip hop R&B producer for Kanye and different people, Ghetto Boys, and I remember him saying that in a video on YouTube that I saw, and thinking, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, and also Telephone Tel Aviv, Josh Eustace is a great electronic music producer. I remember hearing him say the same thing, and kind of hit me from different angles. But for me, I find that just helps inform the production process. And then by the time I'm, officially in mixing phase, I don't have nearly as much that I need to worry about. At that point, it's a little more just about balancing frequencies, figuring out, okay, there's, too much in the low mids, or whatever might be building up or sounding awkward or not quite how I want it. And then also I tend to produce in Ableton and then mix in Pro Tools. So if it's something that depending on some things I'll keep in Ableton, especially Ableton 10. They've improved a lot of the mixing capabilities. So now I think there's less of a need. But when I was making Journey to Los Angeles, I was still on Ableton 9. So I exported everything to Pro Tools, and then I'll keep some of the same plugins on there and just copy the settings. But usually by the official mixing phase, I'm really thinking more about balancing frequencies, panning, so I don't know if that's the right or wrong way to do it. That just seems to work really well for me. And I know a lot of people that, tend to start over from scratch when it's time to mix, and then it's sort of all fresh in a way. But I think for me, because I'm the producer, and when it's in my own releases, for sure, I'm generally the mixing engineer. I feel like I'm already hearing what I want the song to be, so why not just kind of get into it right away? And it saves time and energy, and also I think ends up keeping a bit of the freshness of the original idea, whether it's when you're writing or producing. Like, I think it keeps a little bit of that vibe going if immediately the emotional weight of like, oh, we just recorded those vocals, like, oh, what if I put this on there, and like, man, now it sounds perfect.
Yeah.
But to each their own. I think there's no right or wrong way. Even things that are technically wrong can be cool. Sometimes clipping sounds really good, sometimes it sounds terrible. Most of the time it sounds terrible, but I think whatever sounds good, whatever gets you to the music you want to make, it's all good.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with you that it's kind of at the end of the day, if you get to where you want to get. I know one thing, and I do want to change gears to maybe talking about working on other people's music, which I know you do a lot of as well. But just touching on what you were saying, I think one thing I've learned in my own work, or working with other people, and where I've made mistakes sometimes, is like you're saying, if you have a very specific sound, like, oh, I know I'm going to do this to the drums, or I know I'm going to do this to the vocal, that you want to definitely do in the production process, because you never want to have that conversation where the client, because they can't hear what's in your head, and you're like, oh yeah, no, it's going to be great, like, trust me, it's going to be great, and they're saying, it doesn't sound so great right now,
Right.
So it's definitely like that. And you're right, that's more crafting a sound that's just like if you were dialing in an amp, you're just doing it after
Right.
it's recorded.
Right.
But I think that's a great point to differentiate, quote unquote technical mixing versus things that are actually part of the production process that we might think are mixing. Um,
Definitely.
yeah. But I do want to ask you, so when you're working on other people's music,
Mhm.
um, do you have like a different approach, or what's your approach in general if somebody approaches you about a collaboration, like producing, engineering, etc. Like, what are you looking for in terms of it being a project you're interested in, and then what's your typical like dialogue and workflow?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I think it really can depend on a lot of factors. Usually it depends in a large part on my relationship to the artist. If it's someone that I've known for a long time and have worked with already, I'm more likely to want to take it on, or be open to it. And also just that can really influence the type of music and things like that. Like, um, but I'd say ultimately it just depends on my connection to the music, and their songwriting, their artistry, and if I feel like it's a project that I can really make it better, I can really bring it to life, I can really add something artistically and help them achieve the best version of themselves, which I think is ultimately what producers are meant to do, and achieve the best song recording at the end of the day. I think I'm definitely open to taking it on. And I've been approached sometimes by artists where I just felt like it wasn't the right fit. Maybe just the style of music they were looking for or wanting to do wasn't something I felt like was necessarily the best fit for me, or that I was the best fit for them. Sometimes I think it's important to just know when you're not necessarily in your lane or something, and just say, look, I think so and so would be better for you, or I think, you know, maybe try somebody else. But ultimately, I think just I want to really feel the music first and foremost. I don't want to work on anything where I don't just have an emotional or visceral connection to the songs, even as demos, even, you know, as something really raw. Like, for instance, the most recent project I produced, that one of the singles came out, I think a week or two ago, which is called Call by Heather Robb. And the full EP will be called Mouths to Ears. It's coming out August 28th on all, you know, all the places we listen to music. But Heather, you know, in her case, we've been friends since probably 2006 or 7 or something like that. She used to play melodica and sing with the Prigs, which is a band I still play with, but we are kind of spread around the country, so we didn't play as much anymore. But so I've known her, and we've been really close friends for years. And I recorded some songs for a band that she plays with called the Spring Standards in my studio, and we were really happy with that, and everything came out great. And then she played some demos that she'd made for me, that she made, you know, solo in GarageBand with just, you know, MIDI controller when she was staying out in the woods, I think in upstate New York. And, you know, the songs were a bit raw in terms of the technical quality, but it was like very, very intimate, very haunting music that really drew me in, really made me curious, really made me want to hear more. And I immediately started getting all these ideas of where these songs could go, in a very organic way. You know, like, I think we should all try to let the music tell us what to do, you know, and make choices that just feel organic and natural as much as we can. And in that case, it just, you know, had all these really cool ideas, from sort of like an Annie Lennox Eurythmics kind of vibe to like Joni Mitchell kind of vibe. And so we set about working on that EP, you know, and sometimes with a project like this, which is an independent project, and just mostly the two of us with some other instrumentalists recording on it, you know, sometimes schedules get a little hectic. So we kind of worked on it as much as we can when our schedules would align last year, and really, really happy with it. So in that case, it was, you know, an artist who I've known for years and worked with. You know, so it really varies. At this point, you know, I'm open to working with anyone, in a certain sense. You know, like, I'd be totally open to anyone sending me a demo, but at the same time, that doesn't mean it's something I necessarily want to take on. But really, my main criteria is just, you know, is this music something that excites me to where I'm going to want to work on it and be inspired to work on it? Because, you know, money's great, but at the end of the day, you know, I don't want to be paid to work on something that just kind of makes me cringe or makes me not excited. And so as much as I can, you know, I try to be really selective and only take on projects that I feel like invested in and excited. Because, you know, I'm sure, as you know, and any other producers know, the producer does a lot of work. You know, it's not just, you know, I mean, in the case of the projects I've been working on, at least, I'm not just, you know, making a beat, recording vocals in a second, and not sending it off to a mix engineer. It's, you know, a lot of writing, a lot of co-writing, a lot of sculpting, a lot of recording, mixing. And at the end of the day, I don't want to spend all that time if it's not something great. So, you know, artists, if you want a great producer, hit me up. But no, you know, we'll see what the next round of songs or albums entails. But
Yeah, well, and there's a lot of project management duties too that I think
indeed,
maybe when you first envision yourself doing the work, you know, you don't really realize. But you know, we have to remember the way the whole thing started back in the early days of, you know, making records. The producer, I mean, your job title was to produce the finished product. And you know, it's such a blanket term now what that means. And you know, sometimes, you I feel like we're fighting this stereotype of, I don't know, I guess it comes from people having these experiences, but people thinking like, oh, you're a producer, you're just gonna like tell me what to do, or like,
Right.
try to control my music, blah blah blah. And I think that's, at least in the people in my sphere and probably in your sphere, like that's completely not the case. It's just more, like you said, just trying to, whatever you can do to encourage the best performances and the best, vision of the music and the work. But yeah, sometimes there's all those little housekeeping things, and
Yeah.
oh hey, remember that session we did a year and a half ago, like, that I never followed up on? Do you still have that on your hard drive? That kind of stuff.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I guess larger question is just with your evolution in terms of where you are now, and people, if they read the description below or know a little bit about you, but your background really is more in jazz or jazz adjacent music and largely acoustic instruments. Um, what got you into the more, now you're a, great engineer, you got synths, all the technical sides and just different soundscapes. What was the sort of entry point to get you in that direction?
Yeah. I mean, I think the main thrust of it started when I was making my first album, which is under my, government name, as they say, Matthew Silberman. It's called Questionable Creatures. That album, was recorded, 5 musicians playing together, sort of traditional jazz approach to record making. And, we picked the best takes for each song. And then Michael Perez Cisneros, who engineered the record, amazing engineer based in Brooklyn, New York. He was cool enough to kind of let me sit in on all the mixing sessions. And I became really, really intrigued by it, and just, seeing how you can take something that already sounded great. The rough recordings he made already sounded great because he's a great recording engineer, but seeing how he could turn that into these really beautifully sculpted mixes, I think that really started making me curious. Okay, well, what could I do if it was, a song of myself or a song of something I produced myself? But, honestly, when I think about it, I think it actually started before that in a certain sense, because I've always been intrigued by recording. Like, I remember my mom had an old, think it was I think it was an old Sony tape deck, like a dual cassette recorder from the 70s or 80s, with just probably like an SM58 or some like pretty standard microphone. And, I'd record songs like before I even was playing, any instruments. I was recording like songs I'd learned at summer camp into that. And then, I made like, I think I auditioned for like all-star jazz bands in high school, recording into that. And so it was always something I was kind of fascinated by. And then when I eventually was in college or thereabouts, I thought at that point, I saw myself as possibly wanting to score films. I was already composing a lot in jazz. And so I thought, okay, I should probably just take whatever music technology classes they offered at New School, which isn't a lot. It's really primarily a jazz performance-based curriculum. But so they had a Pro Tools class, which I took, and a MIDI class, which is essentially learning digital performer. But that kind of gave me a little taste of it. And then when then DigiDesign, now Avid, came out with the first Mbox, that was like my college graduation present. And so I got an Mbox and I got a microKORG, and I just started messing around with stuff, and I would make just random weird tracks in GarageBand, or Pro Tools, and, have fun with it. And it was never something I really took seriously. I was always at that point totally focused on saxophone and jazz and playing in bands and whatnot. But I think the process of making my first album kind of reignited that curiosity and that desire to make things on my own and not just need to go into a studio every time I wanted to record a song or an album. And so I at that point I just thought, wow, like what if I started building my own studio and I can make my own records? And yeah, they're not going to sound as good as something Michael Press Cisneros records as of yet, but just to have the control and the flexibility to work on it whenever I wanted to have every track and be able to manipulate it the way I was seeing him, mixing the record. I just thought, okay, I got to do this. So, after the record came out at the end of 2012, beginning in 2013, I just started getting as much gear as I could. And, I ended up upgrading. I think at that point I upgraded to a Digi 003 for my interface. And, I had a Rode K2 was my main mic, and, had the micro Korg, but I think I got a bigger MIDI controller, and just started getting Ableton, getting different soft synths, and then it just grew from there, essentially. But it was at that time when I finished Questionable Creatures, I was realizing I was also musically becoming more and more inspired by electronic music and beat-oriented music like Flying Lotus, Thundercat, Aphex Twin, Boards of Canada, Square Pusher, and some stuff that I'd been familiar with since high school or college, some stuff like Flying Lotus, who I at that point was really new to me. And I started realizing, like, man, I don't know that I really want to still make jazz per se. I mean, I think jazz has always been, if I had to pick one genre of music to make or listen to, maybe that would be it. But at the same time, I've always been influenced by lots of different styles of music. And just hearing what people were doing with electronics and having those kinds of tools able to manipulate acoustic instruments and electronic instruments, I thought, this is really what I think I need to be doing it at this point. So I started learning Ableton. My friend William Flynn, who's an amazing producer, he goes by Sleeper's work, and I recorded some saxophone for some of his songs, and then hearing what he did, just manipulating my saxophone, and he gave me kind of a first Ableton lesson, and I started realizing, like, wow, this is some powerful software that enables you to just kind of think in a different way and approach things in a different way that I could do in Pro Tools or GarageBand or anything else I had. So that's when I really, I think full-fledged made the leap into music production and became focused on that more than saxophone playing, more than just being a gigging performing musician. I guess beginning in 2013, I was looking at myself as a producer first, and kind of everything else started falling into place accordingly. A lot of learning curves, and I'd say I went to new school for my bachelor's, and I basically went to YouTube University for my master's, essentially, or Facebook music production and engineering group, Gear Sluts pages, things like that. But I think that was kind of my master's. Just, okay, what level should I be recording my mics at? Where should my mixes be sitting? Where, and just asking friends, sitting in on sessions, Googling things a lot of trial and error, and, kind of gotten decent at it.
Yeah.
Still a work in progress, for sure.
Yeah. So if I understand this EP, this is a second of a series of there's going to be 3. Is that right?
Yeah. So the first of this series was called Break the Silence. That was released towards the end of 2018. And that, I'd say, stylistically, definitely kind of showing more of my jazz roots, a little more jazz and classical oriented. And that features Ramadouk as well, an amazing Armenian American singer, friend of mine named Hybert, who's on the second track. And then there's excerpts from a speech by Dr. Martin Luther King called The Time to Break Silence, which is where I got the idea and the name of the EP from. And then the last track, Celestial Journey, features Solomon Dorsey on bass, kind of playing the melody, so he sort of takes the lead. And that song I kind of imagined as like a soundtrack to the show Cosmos, that I didn't grow up watching the original with Carl Sagan, but when they came back with Neil deGrasse Tyson as the host, I was really into it, really always loved learning about the cosmos and the universe. So and then this, the second edition, Journey to Los Angeles, which just came out, that is leading, more, I think, rock and roll, R&B elements with some of the jazz and electronic music that I explored on Break the Silence. And then the third EP, I'm actually really excited because I just am finishing up my last projects that I have on the books before I'm able to jump into it. So I'm going to probably start production. I'm going to see if I can take the rest of this week off and just kind of freshen up a bit. But that one is going to be a lot more, I think, just purely electronic music based. Definitely some saxophone and some jazz influence, because I'm still me, but just I already know the tracks that, the demos, or like kind of like half done tracks that are going to be on it, and going to be, I think, darker, more electronic, so I'm really excited to see what becomes of it. I don't yet have a name, but stay tuned. If you don't already follow me on social media or whatever, I'll announce things as they come along, but hoping I can finish production on it by the end of the year, and then we'll see, maybe get it out by like spring of next year. But as you and most producers know, sometimes things can take longer than you think, so
sure,
never know, but that's my goal, at least as of now.
Yeah, well, that sounds great. I mean, we'll keep an eye out, and I'm sure,
Sure.
follow updates on your social profiles as far as the process and where you are with that.
Right.
I really appreciate you spending some time with us, and I really encourage folks to go out and check out, specifically on your Bandcamp page, narducci.bandcamp.com, or the Ropeadope Bandcamp page, and consider supporting Journey to Los Angeles. Like I said, it's a great piece. I mean, the individual components, but as a top to bottom piece, I think it's really great. I just have one last question for you. If I understand correctly, you're a Tottenham supporter?
Huge Tottenham supporter, yeah.
So do you have any, what's on your wish list for this abbreviated off season?
I mean, my wish list would be to bring Mauricio Pochettino back as manager. Honestly, I sort of understand, I guess, why he left / was sort of sacked, and that seems to be a he said kind of situation with him and Daniel Levy. But I respect Jose Mourinho's credentials quite a bit, but I never felt like he was a really good fit stylistically or personality-wise for Tottenham. And I'm not a big fan of the park the bus, counter-attacking kind of style. I think it's anti-Tottenham football. So, I guess I don't think that's going to be happening in the next season. So I guess, I just hope we get more depth in defender and maybe some more depth in midfield. And, I think just hopefully just a season with a little less injury as well. But short of bringing Pochettino back, I think, let's just see what the squad can do with a full off season. And well, I guess it's not even a full off season because, COVID sort of pushed the season back, but
right.
Fingers crossed, they strengthen the squad a bit. I know they've already signed a defender whose name I'm blanking on from Southampton. So that's moving in the right direction, I'd say. But,
okay.
It's just weird seeing Mourinho on the sideline in the Tottenham shirt. So I guess I'll get used to it.
So you're hoping for a top 4 finish, or are you just writing the year off?
I mean, no, I think we definitely need to get back in the top 4. I think, that's one thing I loved about Pochettino is we were consistently finishing in Champions League and then able to attract better and better players. But, I think at least we're in Europe still. I think between that and Mourinho, you're going to be able to still attract some really top players in the off season. And, I think barring, a lot of catastrophic injuries, like I think we'll definitely be competing for top 4. But it's tough. I mean, you know, it's have 6, 7, 8 really good teams that are all kind of battling it out now. So hopefully it's not just the usual suspects, but you know, we'll see. Love to see us break in, get 3rd or 4th for sure, or finish on top. But, you know.
All right. Well, you always know it's a great interview when you end up in an unexpected place. So
Right.
I think we'll leave it there. Guys, this is Matthew Silberman. Check out his music under Narducci. Also check out DeSoto Sound Factory, his studio out there in Burbank, California. Matthew, thanks again for your time. And
Thank you.
Be well. And guys, if you have any questions below, and do the like and subscribe thing. And we'll see everybody next time. Take care.
Cheers. Thanks, everybody.